Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, I ask that the quorum call be rescinded.
Without objection.
Mr. President, today the Senate will vote to begin consideration of legislation that will address some of the seemingly never-ending challenges the world, including the United States, is facing in the Middle East. The decision made at the beginning of the 20th century by then First Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill, to convert British ships from coal to oil for fuel changed world history by making access to the Middle East oil reserves a national security imperative for all developed nations. More recently, on 9/11/2001, when nearly 3,000 Americans lost their lives in a terrorist attack directed from Afghanistan on New York's World Trade Center and the Pentagon, we learned a hard lesson: that though separated by an ocean, what happens in the region does not stay in the region. Finally, with the proliferation of nuclear weapons and the nuclear aspirations of Iran, the #1 state sponsor of terrorism in the world, to attain them, the relative stability and security of the Middle East has a direct connection to our national security as well as that of our allies like Israel. With the administration's recent announcement that the U.S. will begin withdrawing troops from Syria, this debate and these votes could not be more timely. While I'm comforted by the National Security Advisor's John Brennan's recent statement that the withdrawal from Syria be conditions-based, the precise details of how and when it will be executed remain to be seen. One thing, however, is perfectly clear: we cannot allow the creation of a power vacuum in the Middle East to bolster our adversaries' influence in the region. And that's precisely what this legislation addresses. The Strengthening America's Security in the Middle East Act incorporates 4 bipartisan, non-controversial bills that were nearly enacted last year. But the clock on the 115th Congress ran out on December 31st. As we begin what I hope will be another productive year in the Senate, I'm glad we'll have a chance to vote on this legislation. Our national interests demand that we fully support and ensure the security of Israel, our closest ally in the region. As the majority leader said last week, this bill affirms that the U.S. needs to do more than just talk the talk. We must also walk the walk to support Israel's security. This legislation will help Israel maintain a qualitative military edge against ongoing threats by authorizing military assistance and allowing the transfer of equipment and defensive weapons. Importantly, it will also assist Israel in countering the emerging threat of unmanned aerial vehicles deployed by Iran in particular. In addition to supporting Israel, it will empower state and local governments in the United States to counter the anti-Israel boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, better known as BDS, and its discriminatory economic warfare against the Jewish state. In addition to nurturing our relationship with Israel, the bill also recognized the importance of supporting Jordan, another key regional ally. It authorizes legislation to strengthen our defense cooperation and support Jordan's response to the overwhelming humanitarian crisis caused by the Syrian civil war. According to the United Nations, there are more than 740,000 refugees in Jordan. That equates to 89 refugees per 100,000, per 1,000 inhabitants, making them the second highest refugee host nation per capita in the world. The impact of the crisis in Syria is immense and potentially destabilizing and requires our support to maintain the peace. Finally, this bill takes critical steps to address the ongoing war and humanitarian crisis in Syria by providing aid to impacted communities and condemns the heinous human rights violations committed by the murderous Assad regime. Until this horrendous conflict is resolved, new sanctions will be imposed on anyone who supports Syria, either financially or militarily. It is true that this bill will not solve all of the problems in the Middle East. It will not, for example, provide justice to the innocent civilians killed by the Assad regime. It will not rebuild the communities treated as collateral damage throughout this crisis. But it is a step to ensure our allies are prepared to fight for and defend our shared national security interests. Senate Democrats have indicated, unfortunately, that they're likely to block this legislation from coming to the floor, as their discussions with the President on border security funding remains at an impasse. Leader McConnell, though, has made it clear that the Senate will not waste time holding show votes on legislation that the President will not sign. So we continue to wait for Speaker Pelosi and Minority Leader Schumer to take serious, credible action to break that impasse. Until that time, there's a lot of work we can and should do, such as debating and voting on this legislation which will protect our national security interests in the Middle East. 25% of our government has already been shut down, Mr. President, because of this impasse. I urge our Democratic colleagues in the Senate not to shut down the work of the Senate, too. I want to thank the Majority Leader for scheduling this important debate and vote, and I look forward to voting yes when the time comes. Mr. President, as I mentioned, this partial government shutdown continues now on its 18th day. But 18 days in, not much has changed. The newly elected Democratic House refused to come to the negotiating table with a serious offer or to negotiate in good faith. This entire debate has been surreal. I would say it's been a joke, but it's really not funny. It's now degenerated into a game of silly semantics while losing sight of just how much is at stake for the people affected. A secure and vibrant border is critical to the safety and the livelihood of our entire country, and it's, of course, plays a vital part in the daily life for many Texans, especially those who live and work in the border region. If you visit El Paso, for example, out west, you'll see firsthand how interconnected the city is with its neighbor, Juarez. Mexico is literally on the other side of the international bridge. Each day, at that single port of entry, an average of 20,000 people cross the border on foot legally, going to work, going to school, visiting friends and family, or shopping. That's in addition to the 35,000 car crossings and the 2,500 cargo trucks that cross each day just at the El Paso port of entry. I often compare the United States and Mexico to an old married couple that have occasional differences, but who can't get divorced. We depend on one another, and we depend on a safe, secure, and efficient border to allow both countries to live in harmony. But not everyone or everything attempting to cross the border is in our country's best interest. Transnational criminals, drug smugglers, human traffickers, they try to take advantage of any opportunity, any gaps in our border, and they use it to infiltrate, threaten, and endanger our communities. For too long, our frontline officers and agents haven't had the tools and resources they need to do their job. Whether it's outdated infrastructure, personnel shortages, or technology, the fact remains we need additional border security funding to empower these hardworking officers and agents to complete their mission at both the ports of entry and between those ports of entry. After talking to the experts, Border Patrol officials in Texas, as well as local stakeholders, I introduced legislation in the fall of 2017 to address a number of their concerns. That legislation, called the Building America's Trust Act, would have authorized approximately $15 billion over 4 years for a long-term border security and interior enforcement strategy. Notably, the bill had a great deal of discretion for the Department of Homeland Security's experts on the ground to determine what tactics were needed and where. As my friend, former Chief Manny Padilla, formerly Chief of the Border Patrol's Rio Grande Valley sector, once told me, he said the answer to border security from the Border Patrol's perspective is finding the right balance of three things: personnel, technology, and infrastructure. Now, the landscape along the U.S.-Mexico border, particularly the 1,200 miles of common border between Mexico and Texas, the geography varies significantly. So there's no one-size-fits-all solution to border security. And that's why it's important to listen and learn from law enforcement and key stakeholders on how to adapt the right mix to each area. That way we can ensure we are deploying the most effective and practical solutions to achieve operational control along the southern border. Yes, we need physical infrastructure in places, a fence, a wall, a vehicle barrier, for example, because the hardworking agents and officers on the ground tell us that it works, and we would benefit from more of it. But we also need personnel to enforce the laws along the border and ensure our ports of entry are operating efficiently. And yes, we need technology, things like scanners to scan for drugs that are embedded in shipments that come across the border. We need drones and radar and sensors to help maximize border security, as well as have access to the Rio Grande for Border Patrol agents so they can police the border for illegal entry. Now, this shouldn't be a partisan debate, and historically our differences on this topic have not been so polarizing. I think the nature of our political system today makes it easy to forget that not too long ago, border security was actually something supported by both political parties. In 2006, the Senate passed the Secure Fence Act by a vote of 80 to 19. That's what I would call a bipartisan victory. Among those who voted for that bill include many current and former leaders of the Democratic Party, including Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, then Senator Barack Obama, and then Senator Hillary Clinton. They didn't believe that fences and walls and physical barriers were immoral, as apparently the current Speaker of the House of Representatives does. Not only did that legislation call for more than 800 miles of fencing along the U.S.-Mexican border, it also authorized the other important components of border security that I talked about, things like technology and personnel. That was in 2006. In 2013, more recently, all 54 Democratic senators voted for $46 billion in border security, every single one. And now President Trump's request for $5 billion is somehow a non-starter. The Border Security Economic Opportunity and Immigration Modernization Act provided funding for, yes, infrastructure, personnel, and technology. That's exactly the right mix that Chief Padilla mentioned that I referred to a moment ago. So these are really the same types of issues that we're talking about today. These are not radical ideas. We need a sensible combination of physical barriers, technology, and personnel. My Democratic colleagues supported border security during the Bush administration. They supported border security during the Obama administration. And now I would urge them to come to the table with a serious proposal to help secure our border and end this standoff and to stop the foolishness and the political games. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I'd note the absence of a quorum.
Hi, everyone. My name's Mike. I'm the creator of Mox News. And for the last 15 years, I have been telling you that as long as I have the support of the community that I serve, Mox News will post videos forever. And that's the truth. As long as I have your support, no one could ever make me stop. Unfortunately, currently, less than 1/2 of 1/10 of 1% of Mox News viewers ever donate, tip, or contribute anything back. Again, let me make that really clear. Much less than 1/2 of 1/10 of 1% ever give anything back. And to those of you who have donated to Mox News, I want to thank you so much, because it's because of your generosity that we have been able to bring attention to important videos that millions and millions of eyes would have never seen. And I think that that's an amazing thing that we've been able to make happen together. And I can't thank you enough for helping me make that happen. So it's not too late. If you'd like to see Mox News covering the 2020 presidential election, if you can't imagine the 2020 presidential election without Mox News, please, there's still time. You can make a difference. It's easy to make a contribution, donation, or tip. You can go to moxnews.com, or in the text body of this video, there are clickable links to the Patreon page or to the PayPal page. And again, it should take less than 2 minutes to make a donation, and your donation can make a big difference. So I thank you all. Stay cool. One of these days this war is going to end, and it would be awesome if Mox News could be there to celebrate that day with you.